So, welcome everybody to the Humph podcast. Today we are going to be talking about probation reviews. Quite a really, it's a topic that I think most people are quite familiar with, but I think it's a topic that's really going to come to the forefront with some of the legislation changes. And we're going to be talking about actually how critical they are, how to manage them properly, and actually the implications of not doing so with the new legislation that's coming in. So I am going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to just talk about why probation periods really matter.
So probation periods, I think at the moment, depending on who you are and how you manage it within your business, are seen as a little bit of a trial phase for new employees when they first join the business. It's an opportunity for you to assess the employee and also for the employee to work out whether the company is the right fit for them too. I think on balance, some companies run this really well, but the majority probably just see it as a little bit of an informality. And actually, with the employment legislation changes in January, this is going to have to become a lot more of a structured process. So probation periods are the opportunity to set clear expectations for performance and behaviours in terms of the culture of the business and how the new employee joins and sets off. To integrate new employees into your culture, because day one into any business, it takes a little bit of getting used to, and the first 6 months are about really immersing yourself within the culture of the business. Primarily it's there to provide feedback and support, and feedback is the critical point here, which is really that ongoing opportunity to ensure that the employee is performing or behaving in a way that you expected and that they expected coming into the business. It's really important for them to feel part of the team and the company from day one and not to sit there for 3 months without any feedback at all. It gives you the opportunity to enable them to have access and support to the different systems that they need to do their job effectively. To have clarity on an onboarding plan, because I think some people land in the role and are expected to be able to do their job from day one. The reality is that just isn't the case. They do need an onboarding plan and they do need to understand what's expected of them from an objective perspective. And really to ensure that you're having regular conversations with your new employees and that line manager one-to-ones are working in a meaningful way. But most importantly, throughout the probation period, it's really the opportunity to identify any issues that are cropping up with that employee or with the role, or where there's a mismatch, but perhaps when you recruited them, they weren't able to demonstrate all of those skills. So it's really important during that probation period that you are checking in regularly to ensure that they can perform the role and have the support that they need. What we often find with companies is perhaps there's a 6-month probation period. We get to 5 months and 2 weeks, and all of a sudden, the line managers suddenly realise that their probation's coming up, and all of a sudden there are performance or behaviour issues, and we have 2 weeks to turn it around to either extend the probation or close the probation. And that's not fair to the company or the employee, which means with the day one rights coming into effect in January 2027, this becomes even more important because you have a 6-month period of time to ensure that you are managing that probation period effectively. So the probation period management becomes even more essential moving forwards. So Tess, in terms of people that are listening to the podcast, how do we or they manage probation effectively?
Yeah, good question. So I'm going to start with, you've just teed me up nicely there, Sarah. First of all, it's most important to have no surprises. I have this as a clear mantra in any line manager conversations I'm having. Just make sure there are no surprises and just keep that underpinning everything.
Yeah.
So to do that, set really clear objectives from day one is the most important starting point. Ensure that they are measurable goals, you've set clear expectations, and you've really set out what success looks like. How will they know that they've been successful in their probation? And then secondly, I would say make sure you're giving some regular feedback throughout. So hold a check-in with them. Don't wait until the end. I usually recommend monthly check-ins and provide that feedback and coaching along the way. I also think it's really important in those check-ins to ask questions. So keep checking in with them. How are you getting on? how are you finding everything? Is it meeting your expectations? All those kinds of things. I think you get a lot from asking questions, not just giving
Yeah.
feedback, and support them through that period as well. It's a period of change for them.
And Tess, I think for me, that's a really great opportunity for the manager and the employee to build a relationship. Because,
Definitely.
and if you have a relationship with an employee, you notice things that perhaps they don't want to talk about, or you notice where perhaps they're struggling a little bit with maybe a platform that they've got to use or something like that. So I think when you have those regular conversations, you just build a relationship that then makes a lot of this a lot easier, rather than just having, one meeting, check in, ask 50 questions, they give you 50 answers and you go away. I'm not sure that always works so well.
Yeah, I think that's even more important when you're working remotely, because you lose that kind of day-to-day kind of conversational part. So I think it's really important to get them booked in right from the start, and that's something I always encourage line managers to do. Just put a weekly check-in to start with, and then just move those to monthly, so you're having some structured conversations. The one that's non-negotiable for me is that midway check-in.
Yeah.
So having that mid-probation review, stick it in the diary right at the start. And give them some feedback at that point. Go through how they've been delivering against those day one objectives so far. Are they on track? And share any peer feedback that you've got as well. I'm a massive fan of peer feedback. I think it's really, really valuable, and it's really helpful for people to understand it from different perspectives as well. But again, seek their feedback. Don't just sit there and deliver feedback at them. Ask them how they think things are going, because I think that can be really insightful. So you can bounce off what they're seeing and feeling. And I think it's really important to ensure they leave that meeting knowing exactly what they've got to do for that probation to be successful. So again, no surprises. They're coming out midway. They know what they've got to do. What's really important, particularly if you are having to give some constructive feedback along the way, is keeping clear documentation of that. So follow it up in an email, make sure you're keeping clear written records of any feedback that you're giving. That's going to be even more essential with the new 6-month unfair dismissal rule coming. So make sure that we are, really documenting everything. And then finally getting to that end of probation review meeting. Firstly, make sure it's scheduled, make sure you actually have an end of probation review meeting, and be honest and constructive in your feedback, and super clear about what the outcome is. So has it been successful? If so, confirm it. If it's being extended, tell them why. And if it's been unsuccessful, tell them why as well. Be super clear about the outcome of that. Overall, I would say being consistent is really, really important. So make sure you take a structured approach that will help you to protect the employee and ensure that things are fair for the employee and the business.
Okay. So I guess the other question really for us to discuss today is what happens if people don't manage probation. And actually there is a question there around, if probation rolls round, let's use the unknown client that I've just mentioned. So say for example, an employee rolls over the six-month period, your probation period 6 months, and it hasn't been managed up to that point. It's probably worth discussing what happens, because is it that they automatically, fall into a permanent employee at that point and probation's ended, or do we need to be confirming probation? Because I think that's an open question sometimes, probation, which is going to become even more important in January. So let me pose the question at both of those. How do you handle those situations? We've all been in situations where 6 months has gone by. We've missed the end of probation for the employee. What is the legal position for anybody listening to the podcast today on that probation rollover, if you like?
Well, probation is just a contractual term. It's not a legal term, and it's not an employment law term. It's not a legal term. Effectively, it's just a contractual term. So for me, I think if it rolls over, it's unfortunate. And it does present you then with a challenge. And actually, if your contract states that, it doesn't state that you need to be notified that you have had a sexual, that you've had a successful probationary period, then we get this automatic rollover, and there's nothing to support you saying, oh, actually, we didn't have a meeting. We're going to have a meeting. I mean, my advice to people was pick it up. Reach out to the employee straight away, tell them that their probationary period was within this period, that you're going to have that meeting. And you can still then extend today, you can still then actually look and talk to them about extending some of those milestones, extending some of those objectives, and continue to do a little bit more of a closer management with them. But that will
Yeah,
change
I
because
know.
moving forward, let's not roll over, because if you roll over, suddenly they've got rights that is going to make this much more difficult for you to manage, I think would be my kind of thoughts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I,
and I just think it's why it's so important to get those meetings booked in, like right at
Hmm.
the start, do it as part of the onboarding checklist. Just put them in the
mm,
diary because then you're not going to miss them. You can move them if you need to. Obviously, don't go past the 6 month point, but you can
mm,
move it. You won't forget it if it's in the diary.
yeah. So just following on from that, what happens if we don't manage probation? So Lisa's just given a really good example, right? Sometimes if you leave it and it rolls over that 6 month mark, come January, this is going to become incredibly difficult to manage, or could be magic.
Well, you might
And
have some magic at that stage, to be quite honest.
yeah. But if probation isn't managed properly, there is a legal risk, particularly
Yeah.
from January 2027, right? There is a legal risk because they are day one rights. So if you allow probation to roll over, they automatically, depending on what your contract says, will roll over into that permanent employment end of probation. So let's just table that. But there is a wider impact on the business and on the employee if we don't manage probation effectively. So we've talked about the legal risk, right? Unfair dismissal rights coming in at 6 months. So poorly documented, or it's rolled over and nobody's noticed, could lead to claims moving forwards, particularly if you decide not to confirm that probation and it ends up in dismissal. So without putting in place a structured probation process, that is going to cause headaches moving forwards. Also, employee disengagement, a lack of clarity and a lack of feedback when you've started a new role creates massive frustrations, and it will reduce productivity. Let's be super honest here. And also, we talked about cultural fit. They will not feel part of that team. Working in isolation, unsure about whether you're doing a good job or not, is never a good place to be from an engagement or retention perspective, but it also slows down how quickly that person feels integrated into the business. Also, business disruption. Keeping somebody in a role who is not the right fit for whatever reasons, whether that's performance or skills or behaviours, fit, is not a good thing because it impacts others within the company and across teams. So, from a morale perspective, I'm sure we've all seen it in our different teams. If somebody is clearly not a good fit and we haven't been managing that feedback during a probation period, other people pick it up. It does stick out like a sore thumb. So actually, from a line management perspective, you need to be managing this effectively so that you can stay close to it. Moving forwards, look, it's a critical tool now, but come January, this is going to become an even more critical tool because it is your only opportunity to review how a new member of the team is coming into the company and how well they are performing. You have a really short snapshot of time, so putting in place this structure and mechanism moving forwards is going to become even more important. We've had a number of different discussions with clients and also within the Humph team around probation periods and how long that probation period should be. I think on average, most company probation periods are 3 months. Some people have changed them to 6 months, knowing that the new legislation was coming up. But actually, our recommendation to our clients is to set a probation period between 3 and 4 months. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room, given that we have this 6 month period moving forwards, to assess people in their roles at an earlier point, which enables you to extend probations or to make those decisions. For example, if you haven't noticed it's rolled over it, you're at 2.5 months and your probation period's 3, it gives you a little bit more time before that 6 month cutoff to be able to make those decisions in a meaningful way. So
Yeah.
Lisa, over to you on the key takeaways on probation period guidance.
Yeah, so I think probation is very much about setting expectations, make sure that the person is integrating into the team and into the business, it's a great opportunity to provide ongoing feedback. I think the feedback should just be continuous. I think, and especially if you're in a team where your new employee is sitting near you, that's great. You can just have general feedback as you're going through the week, and that's perfect. If they're remote, that makes it a little bit more difficult. But I actually think remote means you need to have those check-ins a bit more regular to make sure that they're not sat in their own head, stressed out because they're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing. So I think it's just a really great opportunity to make sure that you are supporting them during that period of time. I think, especially for remote as well, having clear objectives. So you've got clear expectations about what they need to complete a successful probation. Again, feedback's always got to be regular, and it should be two-way. I think make sure that you do all of this in documentation. And look, we talk about documentation as HR professionals, and sometimes we can get a little bit, I think, wrapped up in the paperwork. You know, it doesn't have to be perfect in as much as it doesn't have to be a form, and it doesn't have to be all formal, but it's really important to make sure that you're sending back via an email, perhaps even, what you've discussed, what you've set out, and what you've agreed, so that they have it in writing. And we are now managing people who have neurodiversity, so asking people that are neurodiverse, how would you like us to kind of work with you during your probationary period? How do you want us to communicate with you? Because that will and can look and feel quite different, and it's about setting them up for success. Like, we've spent time hiring, we've probably paid a fee to hire these people into the business, and we actually need them to get to be in, hit the ground running, and get the job done. So I think it's within our best interest to do everything that we possibly can to bring them into the business and help them to be successful. I think that's the role of a manager, is to make these people successful and provide that framework for them to do so. I think the new 6-month unfair dismissal rights does mean that we need to be more careful. I mean, actually, it starts from hiring. So I think that's a different podcast. I think that's a bigger conversation where we could talk about how we make sure that we're hiring into our businesses in a really, really solid and a really careful way. But it does mean that there's got to be careful management. It does mean that we've got to have some element of documentation. It's got to be two-way, so input from employee, input from business. And I think that becomes, it's just not optional anymore. So, we might have felt that these things were a bit optional, but they're not. They're not going to be. It is going to be absolutely essential that you can demonstrate a fair process in terms of that probationary period. And I think let's not neglect the probation, because it just it can, now we know it's going to lead to legal risk. It leads to low engagement, and it leads to team disruption. But like I said before, you have just hired somebody. You've spent lots of money and lots of time to hire the right person. Why would we not give them the best opportunity to be successful in our business? Because essentially that's what we're looking to do and looking to move forward. And I was just thinking about, Sarah, you said about the kind of from January this comes in place, but actually I think what people need to remember is that if you are hiring anybody, I think it's from July onwards would be the time frame. They will also get the rights at 6 months. So please, don't suddenly think, oh, it only applies from January onwards. That's not the case. It's going to apply from July. So I think that's just an important point to remind people so they don't get caught out. I think, in terms of probationary periods, I mean, it's your chance to set the employee up for success. Protect your business, because also that's really, really important. Make sure it's structured, be proactive, and be really thorough in the way that you support and document this information. And whilst you do that, you're going to get the best out of the person. You get the best out of the team because they're integrated really well, and we get a great member of the team. And whilst all of that's happening, if you have the documentation and you are documenting this in the right way, then you're also going to be compliant. So you're going to give yourself the best opportunity that if unfortunately it doesn't work out, that you've done it in the right way. And that will help the employee, because we always talk about people exiting businesses, and I feel like they need to feel that they've been given the best opportunity, been treated fairly as they leave your business, just as much as they come into your business. So yeah, I think it's going to be interesting times, and I think businesses do really need to think very hard about their probationary periods, which we all know have not always been a massive focus up until this point.
Brilliant.
So thanks everybody for listening. Hopefully the tips that we've given will be useful. as you move into sort of like a new era of employment legislation and lots of changes that are coming our way. We'll be doing more podcasts and would love for you to listen. And we'll be talking about some more of the changes that are going to be happening in the very near future.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks.